The cold steel of the prison bars felt like ice against my palms as I watched him walk away that final time. My husband of 8 years, the man I'd given everything to, had just testified against me in court. He'd looked me straight in the eyes and lied. Called me a manipulative woman who destroyed his military career out of jealousy. The judge believed every word. 24 months in federal prison for charges I never committed. But as I sat in that cell on my first night, something inside me died. And something else was born. You see, death has a funny way of giving you perspective. When the heart monitor flatlined in that prison infirmary 2 years later, when my soul separated from my broken body, I thought it was over. But the universe had other plans. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my 22-year-old body, standing in that same apartment where it all began 10 years ago. The same apartment where I first met Captain Marcus Reed. But this time, I knew the truth. This time, I would be ready. Let me tell you how a love story became a war story, and how death became my greatest teacher. It started on a rainy Thursday in October when I was working the night shift at Memorial Hospital. I was fresh out of nursing school, idealistic and believing that love conquers all. The emergency doors burst open and paramedics wheeled in a soldier who'd been in a car accident during leave. That's when I first saw him. Captain Marcus Reed, 28 years old, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. He was conscious but bleeding from a head wound, his military uniform torn and dirty. But even injured, he carried himself with this commanding presence that made everyone in the room take notice. When our eyes met as I checked his vitals, he smiled through the pain and said, "An angel. I must have died and gone to heaven. I should have seen the red flags then." The way he assessed me like I was a mission objective. The way his charm felt practiced, rehearsed. But I was 22 and lonely, working double shifts to pay off student loans, and he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. During his recovery, he visited the hospital every day, bringing flowers and stories from his deployments overseas. He told me about growing up poor in Alabama, how the military had given him purpose and direction. He spoke about wanting a family someday, a stable home base while he served his country. His vulnerability felt so genuine, so raw. I fell for every calculated word. 3 months later, he proposed in the hospital parking lot where we first met, getting down on one knee in his dress uniform. I said yes without hesitation. We were married 6 weeks after that in a small ceremony at the base chapel. Looking back now, I realize how isolated he kept me. None of my friends were invited. My parents lived across the country and couldn't afford to come. It was just us, 2 witnesses from his unit, and a military chaplain who barely knew our names. The first year of marriage was like living in a beautiful dream. Marcus was stationed at Fort Davidson, and we lived in base housing that felt like playing house. He'd come home in his uniform, sweep me into his arms, and tell me how lucky he was to have found his perfect wife. We'd cook dinner together, watch movies, make love like we were the only 2 people in the world. But there were moments, small ones at first, where I caught glimpses of something darker. Like when I mentioned wanting to take evening classes to get my bachelor's degree. His face would shift, just for a second, before he'd smile and say, "Baby, you don't need more school. You're already perfect. Besides, I need you here when I get home." The military life is stressful enough without worrying about my wife running around campus with college boys. Or when I'd talk about missing my girlfriends from nursing school. He'd get this look in his eyes and pull me closer, whispering, "Why do you need them when you have me? Those girls were just jealous of what we have. Real love means we complete each other." At the time, I thought it was romantic. Possessive love felt like passionate love to my inexperienced heart. I gave up my plans for school. I stopped calling my friends. I became the perfect military wife, existing solely to support his career and make our home a sanctuary from his demanding job. The first deployment came 8 months into our marriage. Marcus was being sent to Afghanistan for 15 months. The night before he left, he held me so tight I could barely breathe and whispered, "Promise me you'll wait for me. Promise me you won't let anyone convince you that you deserve better. I need to know you're here, exactly as you are, when I come back." I promised. I cried for 3 days after he left, mourning the loss of my other half. The base wives tried to include me in their support groups and social events, but Marcus had called me so many times during his first week deployed, telling me how much he missed me and needed me to focus on him, that I started declining invitations. He said the other wives were gossips who would poison my mind against him with stories about military marriages never lasting. So I waited. I worked double shifts at the base medical center, sending him care packages and writing letters every single day. I watched romantic movies alone in our bed, wearing his t-shirts and counting down the days until his return. When he called, which was every other day despite the time difference and operational constraints, I lived for those conversations. He'd tell me how beautiful I was, how perfect our marriage was, how the other soldiers envied him for having such a devoted wife. But something was changing in his voice as the months passed. He seemed distracted during our calls, sometimes rushing to get off the phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd get defensive and accuse me of not trusting him. "Emma, I'm literally fighting a war over here, and you're questioning me about a phone call? Do you have any idea what kind of stress I'm under?" I'd apologize immediately, feeling guilty for adding to his burden. The calls became shorter and less frequent. By month 10 of his deployment, we were talking maybe twice a week, and he always seemed eager to end the conversation. When I expressed feeling lonely or disconnected, he'd tell me I was being selfish and unsupportive. "Real military wives don't complain," he'd say. "They understand that their husband's duty comes first. If you can't handle being a military wife, maybe you should have thought about that before you married me." The emotional whiplash was devastating. One call he'd be the loving husband telling me how much he needed me, the next he'd be cold and critical, making me feel like I was failing at the one job I had, being his wife. I started walking on eggshells during our conversations, carefully monitoring my tone and words to avoid triggering his anger. When he finally came home, something fundamental had changed. He was distant, irritable, and seemed to find fault with everything I did. The house wasn't clean enough, dinner wasn't ready on time, I was wearing too much makeup or not enough. He'd disappear for hours without explanation, claiming he needed to decompress from deployment. Our intimate life became mechanical and cold. He'd take what he wanted and roll over, leaving me feeling used and confused. When I tried to talk to him about how disconnected we felt, he'd explode with rage. "You have no idea what I've been through over there. You've been sitting here in comfort while I've been dodging bullets and watching my friends die, and you want to complain about feeling disconnected? You're being dramatic and needy." I started believing that I was the problem. That I was being too sensitive, too demanding. I threw myself into being the perfect wife even harder, thinking that if I could just love him enough, support him enough, he'd come back to me emotionally. But the man who came back from Afghanistan wasn't the man I'd married. This version of Marcus was calculating and cruel. He'd praise me one moment and tear me down the next, keeping me constantly off balance and desperate for his approval. He started staying out late without explanation, and when I'd ask where he'd been, he'd accuse me of being controlling and paranoid. "What are you, my mother? I don't have to report to you about every minute of my day. I'm a grown man and a decorated soldier. If you can't trust me, that's your problem, not mine." The gaslighting became a daily occurrence. He'd tell me I said things I never said, did things I never did. He'd move objects around the house and then act confused when I mentioned them being in different places, suggesting I was having memory problems or maybe I should see a psychiatrist about my confusion. I started documenting conversations in a journal, trying to keep track of reality because he made me question my own perceptions so frequently. But when he found the journal 6 months after his return, his rage was terrifying. "You're spying on me? taking notes about our private conversations like some kind of detective. This is psychotic behavior, Emma. Normal wives don't do this kind of thing. He ripped up the journal and threw it away, and I felt like he'd erased my sanity along with it. From that moment, I started living in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing which version of my husband I'd encounter when he walked through the door. The second deployment came 2 years into our marriage. This time, Marcus was being sent to Iraq for 18 months. By now, I was so trained to be the perfect, uncomplaining military wife that I smiled and supported his career advancement even though my heart was breaking. But this deployment was different. This time, he barely called at all. Weeks would pass without contact, and when I'd reach out to his unit's family readiness group asking if everything was okay, I'd get vague responses about operational security and communication blackouts. During month 4 of his deployment, I received a call that changed everything. A woman's voice, nervous and shaking, asked if I was Emma Reed. Yes, who is this? My name is Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk about Marcus. My blood turned to ice. Sarah explained that she was a civilian contractor working on the base in Iraq where Marcus was stationed. She'd been having an affair with my husband for 3 months, but she'd just discovered he was married when she overheard another soldier talking about Captain Reed's wife back home. I had no idea, she said, crying. He told me he was divorced. He said his ex-wife was crazy and had tried to ruin his career. I'm so sorry. I thought you should know. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. But what came next was even worse. Sarah told me that Marcus wasn't just having an affair with her. There were multiple women, both civilian contractors and female soldiers. He'd created this whole persona of being a divorced, available officer who was looking for love overseas. There's more, Sarah said reluctantly. He's been selling military supplies on the black market. Equipment, ammunition, medical supplies. I have photos and documentation. I think he's using the money to fund his lifestyle and pay for gifts for all these women. I sat in stunned silence as she detailed my husband's extensive criminal activities. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was betraying his country, his oath, everything he claimed to stand for. The man I'd built my entire identity around supporting was a fraud and a criminal. After I hung up with Sarah, I spent 3 days in a fog of disbelief. But then the anger hit. The rage at being deceived, manipulated, and emotionally abused for years finally found its target. I decided to expose him. I contacted Sarah and asked her to send me everything she had. Photos of Marcus with other women, documentation of the black market activities, communications between them where he'd lied about his marital status. I compiled it all into a comprehensive file. But I made a crucial mistake. I was naive about military protocol and chain of command. Instead of going through proper channels, I was so desperate to expose his lies that I sent copies of everything to his commanding officer, the base chaplain, and several other military personnel all at once. I also sent copies to the military police and the Inspector General's office. In my emotional state, I didn't realize that my method of reporting would be seen as improper and potentially damaging to ongoing investigations. I just wanted the truth to come out. I wanted justice for all the lies and abuse. Marcus came home early from deployment 2 weeks later. But instead of being arrested for his crimes, he walked through our front door with a lawyer and a story that turned me into the villain. He claimed that I had fabricated all the evidence because I was a jealous, unstable wife who couldn't handle military life. He said I'd hired someone to create fake photos and documents in an attempt to destroy his career because I was angry about his deployments. He painted me as a woman who had become increasingly paranoid and controlling, someone who had started stalking his colleagues and creating elaborate fantasies about affairs that never happened. The worst part was that he was believable. Marcus had always been charismatic and respected by his superiors. He played the role of the devoted husband whose mentally unstable wife was trying to destroy him out of spite. He had documentation of my erratic behavior, the journal I'd kept that he now claimed showed signs of paranoid delusions, testimony from neighbors about how I'd isolated myself and seemed anxious all the time, medical records showing I'd been prescribed anti-anxiety medication. When the investigation began, Sarah had mysteriously disappeared. Her contract had been terminated, and she'd returned to the States with no forwarding address. The other women Marcus had been involved with either denied everything or claimed I had harassed them into making false statements. The evidence of black market activities suddenly became questionable, possibly fabricated by a desperate wife. Marcus's defense was masterful. He acknowledged that our marriage had been under strain due to the pressures of military life and his deployments. He admitted that I had become increasingly paranoid and jealous, requiring constant reassurance and displaying signs of mental instability. He painted himself as a patient husband who had tried to get me help, but I had refused treatment and instead had embarked on a campaign to destroy his reputation and career. The military justice system sided with him. I was charged with filing false reports, attempting to obstruct military operations, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Marcus testified against me at my court-martial, looking every inch the wounded, honorable soldier whose unstable wife had betrayed him. "Your Honor," he said, his voice breaking with just the right amount of emotion, "I love my wife. I've tried to stand by her through her mental health struggles, but she's crossed a line that I can't ignore. Her actions don't just hurt me, they hurt the entire military community and could have compromised ongoing operations. I believe she needs help, not punishment, but I also believe there have to be consequences for actions that could have put soldiers' lives at risk." I sat there listening to him lie under oath, transforming our entire marriage history into a story where I was the unstable, abusive partner and he was the long-suffering victim. Every moment of his gaslighting and emotional manipulation was reframed as evidence of my mental illness. Every time he'd made me question my own reality was now proof that I couldn't distinguish between truth and delusion. The judge sentenced me to 2 years in federal prison. Marcus filed for divorce while I was awaiting transfer to the correctional facility. He got everything, the house, the savings, even my car. He also got a military commendation for handling a difficult situation with such grace and professionalism. Prison was a special kind of hell for someone like me. I'd never been in trouble with the law before, never even had a speeding ticket. I was a middle-class nurse who'd trusted the wrong man and ended up in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. The other inmates could smell my naivety and fear like blood in the water. But prison also gave me something I'd never had before, clarity. Without Marcus's constant manipulation and gaslighting, my mind began to clear. I started to see our entire relationship for what it had really been, not a love story, but a long-term psychological abuse campaign designed to isolate and control me. I spent my time in prison educating myself about narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, and manipulation tactics. I read everything I could get my hands on about military culture and how abusers could use the system to their advantage. I learned about DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, which was exactly what Marcus had done to me. But most importantly, I started planning. If I ever got out of prison, I would expose the truth. I would find Sarah and the other women. I would track down the evidence of his criminal activities. I would make sure that everyone who had believed his lies knew exactly who Marcus Reed really was. The problem was that prison had broken my body along with my spirit. The stress, the poor medical care, the constant state of hypervigilance, it all took its toll. By my 2nd year, I was having chest pains and difficulty breathing. The prison medical staff dismissed my symptoms as anxiety and panic attacks. On a Tuesday morning in March, I collapsed in the prison laundry facility. By the time the guards got me to the infirmary, I was in full cardiac arrest. I was only 24 years old, but my heart had given out under the cumulative stress of everything I'd endured. I remember floating above my body, watching the prison medical team work frantically to revive me. I felt a strange sense of peace, like I was finally free from all the pain and betrayal. But then I felt myself being pulled backward, through time itself, like I was being rewound through my own life. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in my old apartment, the one I'd lived in before I met Marcus. I was 22 years old again, wearing the clothes I'd worn on that fateful Thursday night 10 years ago. But this time, I had all my memories intact. I knew everything that was going to happen. I knew Marcus's playbook. I knew his lies before he told them. And this time, I would be ready. The first thing I did was quit my job at Memorial Hospital. I called in sick for 3 days, then submitted my resignation letter, claiming I'd decided to pursue other opportunities. I couldn't risk being there when Marcus came in from his car accident. I couldn't let him see me and begin his manipulation campaign. But I also couldn't just avoid him forever. I needed to expose him, and to do that, I needed evidence. Real evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. So I started investigating his life before he'd even met me. Using my knowledge of his background and the internet skills I'd developed during my time in prison, I began digging into Marcus Reed's past. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. I discovered that I wasn't his first victim. There was a woman named Lisa in his hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, who he'd dated during his first military assignment. She'd filed a restraining order against him for stalking and harassment, but he'd been transferred to a new base before any serious consequences could follow him. There was another woman, Jennifer, from his time at Fort Bragg. She'd accused him of stealing money from her bank account and emotional abuse, but she dropped the charges after Marcus had convinced his command that she was a vindictive ex-girlfriend trying to damage his career. The pattern was always the same. Marcus would target vulnerable women, usually younger and isolated from their support systems. He'd love-bomb them initially, creating an intense, passionate relationship that felt like destiny. Then he'd begin the systematic process of isolation and control, cutting them off from friends and family while making himself the center of their world. When he'd gotten everything he could from them, money, emotional support, sexual gratification, he'd begin the discard phase, becoming cruel and abusive until they either left him or he manufactured a reason to leave them. If they tried to expose his behavior or hold him accountable, he'd use his military position and natural charisma to paint them as unstable, vindictive women who couldn't handle rejection. But this time would be different. This time, I had knowledge of his methods and a decade of hindsight to guide my actions. I would build an airtight case against him before he even knew I existed. I started by creating multiple fake social media accounts and carefully infiltrating his social circles. I befriended his colleagues' wives, joined online military spouse groups, and began building relationships with people who knew him professionally. I was careful to never seem too interested in Marcus specifically. I was just a friendly nurse who was thinking about dating in the military community. Through these connections, I learned that Marcus was already laying the groundwork for his next victim. He'd been spending time at a local coffee shop near the base, flirting with a young college student named Amy who worked there part-time. She was 19, studying early childhood education, and clearly flattered by the attention from an older, sophisticated military officer. I couldn't let him destroy another innocent woman's life. But I also couldn't directly warn Amy without seeming crazy or jealous. Instead, I had to be strategic. I started frequenting the same coffee shop, becoming a regular customer who was friendly with all the staff. I made sure Amy and I developed a casual friendship, talking about school and her dreams of becoming a teacher. I never mentioned Marcus directly, but I shared general advice about dating and relationships, subtly planting seeds about recognizing manipulation tactics and trusting her instincts. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence of Marcus's past crimes and misconduct. I reached out to Sarah through a series of carefully crafted fake identities, eventually gaining her trust enough that she agreed to meet me in person. When I explained who I really was and what had happened to me, she broke down crying. "I've been living with the guilt for years," she said. "I knew what he did to you was wrong, but I was too scared to come forward after I saw how he destroyed your life. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe he'd just move on and stop hurting people. Sarah still had all the evidence she'd originally shared with me. Photos, documents, financial records showing Marcus's black market activities. She'd kept it all as insurance, terrified that he might come after her someday. But she'd also gathered additional evidence over the years, including testimony from other women he'd manipulated overseas and documentation of his ongoing criminal activities. With Sarah's evidence in hand, I began building connections with military personnel who couldn't be influenced by Marcus's charm or manipulation. I found a female military investigator, Major Patricia Williams, who specialized in cases involving abuse of power and misconduct. Through a carefully orchestrated series of anonymous tips and evidence drops, I began feeding her information about Marcus's pattern of behavior. But I wasn't just focused on his military crimes. I was also documenting his psychological abuse patterns. I hired a private investigator to track his current activities, and what we discovered was that he was already beginning his manipulation campaign with Amy from the coffee shop. He'd told her the same lies he'd told me, that he was looking for a serious relationship, that he'd been hurt by women in the past who couldn't handle military life, that she was different from all the others. He was taking her to the same restaurants he'd taken me to, using the same romantic gestures and lines that had made me fall in love with him. Watching him repeat his exact playbook with another victim filled me with a cold rage. But it also gave me the perfect opportunity to expose him in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. I began secretly recording his interactions with Amy. I followed them on dates, capturing audio and video of him using the same manipulation tactics, the same lies, the same psychological abuse strategies he'd used on me and his previous victims. I documented how he isolated her from her friends, convinced her to quit her part-time job so she could spend more time with him, and began the process of making her completely financially and emotionally dependent on him. When Amy started showing signs of the same confusion and self-doubt that I'd experienced, I knew it was time to act. I couldn't let him destroy another woman's life, and I had enough evidence to ensure he would face real consequences this time. I arranged for Major Williams to receive a comprehensive file containing everything I'd gathered, documentation of Marcus's criminal activities overseas, testimony from multiple victims, financial records showing his theft and black market dealings, and video evidence of his current manipulation campaign with Amy. But I also sent copies to the local police, the FBI field office that handled military contract fraud, and several investigative journalists who specialized in military misconduct cases. This time, I made sure the evidence couldn't be suppressed or explained away by one person's opinion of Marcus's character. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. When confronted with overwhelming evidence from multiple independent sources, Marcus's charm offensive fell apart. He couldn't explain away the financial records, the photos, the testimony from multiple women, or the video evidence of his current manipulation tactics. Amy was devastated when she learned the truth about the man she'd been falling in love with, but she was also grateful to be free from his influence before he could completely destroy her life. She agreed to testify about his manipulation tactics, adding her voice to the growing chorus of women who had been victimized by Marcus Reed. The military moved quickly to distance themselves from the scandal. Marcus was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, conduct unbecoming an officer, and abuse of his position. The civilian authorities also filed charges related to his financial crimes and pattern of psychological abuse. But what satisfied me most wasn't his criminal conviction, it was watching his carefully constructed facade crumble in public. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the military con man who had manipulated multiple women while stealing from the government he'd sworn to serve. His colleagues, who had once respected and admired him, now saw him for what he really was. During his trial, I sat in the courtroom gallery every day, watching him try desperately to maintain his innocent act. But without the ability to gaslight and manipulate his victims, without the power to control the narrative, Marcus Reed was revealed as nothing more than a pathetic, narcissistic predator who had used his uniform and charm to prey on vulnerable women. When he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, followed by a dishonorable discharge and lifetime registration as a military offender, I felt a sense of justice that had been denied to me in my previous life. But more importantly, I felt peace. The women he had victimized finally had their voices heard and their experiences validated. Amy was able to finish school and pursue her dream of becoming a teacher, free from his psychological manipulation. Sarah was able to testify truthfully about what she had witnessed overseas, helping to expose the broader corruption that Marcus had been part of. As for me, I used my second chance at life to become an advocate for victims of narcissistic abuse and military domestic violence. I returned to school, earning degrees in psychology and criminal justice. I now work with organizations that help military spouses recognize and escape abusive relationships. Sometimes I wonder if my experience of dying and being reborn was real or if it was some kind of psychological break that allowed me to reimagine my past and find the strength to fight back. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I learned the truth about love and manipulation, about justice and revenge, about the power we all have to rewrite our stories when we refuse to accept the roles that others try to force us into. Marcus Reed thought he had destroyed me completely. He thought he had crafted the perfect crime, turning his victim into the perpetrator and walking away clean while I rotted in prison for crimes I didn't commit. But he underestimated the power of a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain from exposing the truth. In my first life, I was a naive young woman who believed that love meant sacrificing everything for another person. I thought that being a good wife meant accepting abuse and manipulation as signs of passion and devotion. I let Marcus convince me that my reality was wrong, that my perceptions were flawed, that I was crazy for questioning his obvious lies. But in my second life, I became someone different. I became a woman who understood that real love doesn't require you to lose yourself, that healthy relationships don't involve constant gaslighting and emotional manipulation, that being strong sometimes means walking away from someone who is destroying you. I learned that revenge isn't about becoming like your abuser, it's about ensuring that they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you. It's about giving voice to all the victims who were too afraid or too broken to speak their truth. It's about creating a world where predators can't hide behind uniforms or charm or social manipulation to continue their campaigns of abuse. The Marcus Reeds of the world count on their victims staying silent, staying isolated, staying convinced that they somehow deserve the abuse they receive. They rely on a system that gives them the benefit of the doubt while questioning the credibility of the women they've destroyed. They use institutions like the military to shield themselves from consequences while they systematically destroy the lives of anyone who threatens their false image. But they're only as powerful as we allow them to be. When we speak truth to their lies, when we support each other instead of competing for the scraps of affection they offer, when we refuse to accept gaslighting as love and manipulation as romance, they lose their power over us. My story isn't really about revenge. It's about reclaiming truth. It's about refusing to let someone else write your story for you, especially when that story is designed to destroy you while protecting them. It's about understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is expose someone's lies, even when, especially when, that someone is supposed to love you. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, please know that you're not crazy. Your perceptions aren't wrong. Your reality is valid. The person who is making you question your own sanity is the one with the problem, not you. You don't need to die and be reborn to reclaim your truth. You don't need supernatural intervention to find the strength to fight back. You just need to remember that you deserve to be loved without losing yourself, respected without being diminished, and supported without being controlled. The Marcus Reeds of the world are counting on you to stay silent, to stay isolated, to stay convinced that you're the problem. But you're not the problem. You never were. And once you truly understand that, once you stop accepting their version of reality and start trusting your own perceptions again, they lose their power over you completely. That's when the real revenge begins, not because you set out to destroy them, but because you refuse to let them destroy you. And in a world where predators rely on their victims' silence and shame, simply telling your truth becomes the most powerful weapon you can wield. My name is Emma, and I survived Marcus Reed. But more importantly, I made sure that his next victims wouldn't have to. That's not revenge, that's justice. And sometimes, justice is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for all the people you'll never meet who won't become victims because you found the courage to speak your truth. The prison bars that once held my body couldn't contain my spirit. The lies that once defined my reality couldn't survive contact with the truth. And the man who once held complete power over my life is now exactly where he belongs, behind bars, stripped of his uniform and his facade, facing the consequences of his actions for the first time in his pathetic life. But the real victory isn't his imprisonment. The real victory is that I'm free, free from his manipulation, free from his lies, free from the prison of self-doubt and gaslighting that he spent years constructing around me. I'm free to love myself, to trust my own perceptions, to build a life based on truth rather than the twisted fantasies of a narcissistic predator. And that freedom, that truth, that justice, that's worth dying for. That's worth being reborn for. That's worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. Because at the end of the day, we all have a choice. We can accept the roles that others try to force us into, or we can write our own stories. We can stay silent about the abuse we've endured, or we can speak truth to power. We can let our abusers win by destroying our spirits, or we can refuse to give them that victory. I chose to fight back. I chose to expose the truth. I chose justice over silence, truth over lies, freedom over the false security of staying trapped in an abuser's version of reality. And in making those choices, I didn't just save myself. I saved Amy, and Sarah, and every other woman who might have crossed Marcus Reed's path in the years to come. I saved them not through supernatural intervention, but through the very human act of refusing to stay silent about the truth. That's the real magic of revenge. It's not about becoming like your abuser, it's about refusing to let them continue being who they are. It's about ensuring that their power to hurt others dies with their lies. It's about creating a world where truth wins, where justice prevails, where love doesn't require you to lose yourself. My husband jailed me for ruining his military marriage. But in the end, I exposed his lies and ruined his life instead. And he was shocked that the woman he'd broken and discarded had found the strength to rise from the ashes of his destruction and become the instrument of his downfall. But I wasn't shocked. Because once you've died and been reborn, once you've touched the bottom of despair and clawed your way back to the light, once you've faced the worst that another human being can do to you and survived, nothing can ever break you again. And that, more than any revenge, more than any justice, more than any victory, that is true freedom. The bars may have held my body, but they never held my spirit. The lies may have shaped my first life, but they couldn't survive in my second one. And the man who thought he had destroyed me completely became the instrument of his own destruction the moment I refused to stay silent about his truth. My name is Emma Reed no more. My name is Emma, survivor, truth-teller, and guardian of justice. And this is my story, not the one he tried to write for me, but the one I wrote for myself. And in the end, that makes all the difference.